These pictures were taken at the Robbins Farm, Warsaw, Indiana, in the spring of 1946 by Robert and Sybil Robbins. Home Sweet Home was located 4 miles northeast of Warsaw, Indiana. The house there was built around 1907-1908 after the original home was burned. The barn was built sometime before that. Of course, we had to find a robin on the Robbins Farm. The main year-round income on the farm was from the dairy herd. They have between 20 and 25 head of purebred registered Guernseys. Here they are out in the pasture. They had good pasture to graze in. Each afternoon or evening, the cows had to be brought from the pasture to the barn for the milking. Normally that was one person's job, but on this particular day, the whole family turned out. It was Father Robbins, his oldest son Milo, my oldest brother, and his 2 sons, his oldest Clay, and the youngest Harry. Here they are. Here they are from a view from the top of the barn, looking down over the barnyard and the water tank. As I said, these cows were all registered purebred Guernseys, and these are some of the prize and some of the names, if you notice, had extensive names, several names in the register. They would produce probably 2 to 2.5 gallons of milk at a milking. I believe Church of the Brethren sponsored a European relief in which they asked for cows for resupplying the dairy herds in Europe, and this was the calf that we sent. Of course, every good herd had to have a good bull, and this was the prize that they had at that time. That was my oldest brother Milo on the end of the rope with the hat. Of course, there was milking was a big chore twice a day, but with the purchase of the milking machine, it was considerable help in milking the 15, 18 head of cattle twice a day. The nephews thought this was great when they didn't have to hand milk that many. Even with the milking machine, it required the final stripping of the milk, but that was light compared to the complete milking. Each cow's milk was weighed in order to keep an accurate record to weed out any low producers. Even Aunt Sybil got in on the weighing whenever she was home. That Guernsey milk tested around 6.5% butter fat. While the cows were being milked, they were fed their grain. They supplemented their hay or their grass from the fields. Of course, you always had your pets around the barn. The kittens and the dog made their appearance whenever the milking was taking place for their fresh milk that they loved. Some of the spring work was the spraying of the peach orchard. I think there was around 50 peach trees, and this is Milo on the sprayer, Luella driving, his wife driving the tractor. They had some wonderful peaches there. They had some wonderful peaches there. Along with other spring work was preparing the fields for planting. However, this is Dad's little garden tractor he had purchased, and I got to play with it. Never had something like that when I was at home. It was great for Mother and Dad's gardening rather than having to drive a horse back and forth to do the cultivating. Kids must play. Of course, there was the larger fields to prepare, and here Milo is plowing, getting ready for planting. You could see the rich, dark soil that we have. Part of the farm, part of it was sandy, which was good for other crops. After the plowing came the harrowing in order to prepare the seed bed. This is Glay, Milo's oldest son, on the tractor. Then came the corn planting. This is Milo again putting fertilizer into the corn planter, which dropped the seed and the fertilizer at the same time. He was uncanny in the ability to drive the tractor and to have the straight rows that looked beautiful when the corn came up knee high to shoulder high. You could see the beautiful rows. This is a view from the back of the barn looking out over the hay fields, the alfalfa, and the wheat field. This is Father Robbins on the right in the straw hat, Milo on the left, and his two boys, Clay and Gene. Clay and Harry, I believe it is. General view of the back part of the farm. Then came the cutting of the hay. At one time we just put it loose in the barn, but with the baling the hay, you could put more under cover in the same given space than you could loose hay. Baling was a three-man job, as you can see, the driver and two men to stick the wires to bind the bale. Then everyone turned to load it to get it in before a rain. Different from the huge round bales that you see in the fields nowadays. Another crop, cash crop, was the potatoes. Here they are digging the potatoes. This is Dad again on the driving the tractor, and Milo on the potato digger. This was great, and in fact it laid the potatoes right on top of the ground, although you still had to lean over to pick up the potatoes. Usually that turned into a neighborhood project. We would invite other people in the neighborhood in to help pick up, but you can see it's a breaking job. A general view of our help that day. After the potatoes were picked up, they were put in a storage area for drying and then sorting and weighing. We kept a lot of the small potatoes for our own use and also for seed for the next year. Here Dad is bagging them for retail, and most of the potatoes went to the people in Warsaw. Dad would deliver it to their home. This is just a general view of the farm in the fall. This is just a general view of the farm in the fall. Corn picking time. Just a general view of the farm in the fall. corn picking time, Dad thoroughly enjoyed in his later years for having picked by hand for probably over 50 years. When they got the corn picker, he came out of retirement in order to have the fun of driving the corn picker. It really threw out the corn there. I think nearly all the corn was used to feed the hogs, the chickens, the cows, and the horses. Yes, we still had horses, even though they were not used for anything. Dad just couldn't sell them. They weren't of that much value with so many tractors, so he just turned them out to enjoy their good life of eating and running as they could. This used to be the hired hand's house. When Mom and Dad retired from active farming, they repaired it and fixed it up for their summer living. This is a flower garden Mother had at the south of the house overlooking a small stream. Whatever she put in the ground seemed to bloom. And this is their iris and peony. If you'll notice, when the white peony comes on, you'll see an ant crawling across the bloom. Whenever we were able to get leave from the Navy and would go home, the family would make an extra attempt to have a family reunion, and with the 5 of us children and grandchildren and the in-laws, we had a real good gathering. That's Dad just came down the hill. This is Mary on the right with her daughter and her husband Dana. Howard and Bertha on the left, Wallace there with the pipe. Mother Robbins coming down the hill to join the group. And she will sit next to Bertha, which is Wallace's wife, and Wallace just stood up. Howard and Bertha again on the left. Moving too fast to name it all. Yes, it was home sweet home. The house and barn still stand in 1991, and people are living in it. Now, for a little change, we'll go to Winona Lake, which was Sybil's home. For a little change, we'll go to Winona Lake, Indiana, which was Sybil's home, the home of Billy Sunday Tabernacle, and famous for their swans. This was Sybil and 2 of her aunts. A general view of Winona Lake. It was a beautiful lake, natural lake. Sybil and a squirrel playing hide and seek, I think. Mother Sailor lived at Winona, and I think this was an election day, probably 46, 47, and Grandmother Knauer, Mother Sailor's mother also. They lived a good many years at Winona Lake. They loved the flowers. Grandpa Canower was a caretaker for Winona Lake for many years, and they had many of the flowers that he had planted around the lake, the grounds there. This is Mother Robbins with her granddaughter, Mary's youngest daughter, Janet. This is Carol and Mary Ann. Sybil and Janet again. And then Mary and Dana. Mary, my sister, and Dana, her husband, and their youngest, Janet, which lives in Olympia, Washington now.